Hello! So today I am back with part 2 of my January wrap-up. Now I read fewer books in the second half of January than I read in the first half, but I read slightly longer books. I read some really interesting books that I really enjoyed. I read my first Zadie Smith. Actually, I read 2 Zadie Smiths. I read a classic that I've been meaning to read for a really long time. So instead of me waffling on, maybe we should just talk about the books because that's kind of what we're here for. So the first couple of books that I read in the second part of January were books that I've been meaning to get to for quite a while and have been on my shelf for ages. And the first one of those is The Reader, and I'm going to butcher this guy's name, by Bernhard Schlink. I'm not sure I'm saying that right, but anyway. I've been meaning to read this for a while, but I have seen the movie, and that made me a bit lazy in terms of reading the book because I felt like I knew the story. But I really wanted to read it because I think it was an interesting concept. Essentially, this book is about a boy of 17 who gets into a relationship with a slightly older woman, and they have this slightly tempestuous love affair which ends quite abruptly when she disappears. She moves cities, and many years later when he's, I think, finishing up university, he attends a trial of people who were active in concentration camps under Hitler, and she's one of the people on trial. And I thought it was really interesting because really what the book is commenting on is German identity and collective memory, and how do you relate to people who were alive under Hitler and lived through that and possibly were involved in that, and how do Germans view themselves and view the people around them based on that. I thought that was very interesting. But more than that notion of the book, which I did enjoy and did find interesting, I particularly enjoyed first half of the book, which examines their relationship while it's ongoing, and I thought that was done really well, and I felt that it brought out the subtleties in the relationship really well, and overall I really thought that the book worked and I really enjoyed it. But again, I enjoyed it more for the nuances of their relationship than for the general idea of German collectivity and identity. But that aspect was also interesting, but I don't think it would have worked without the particularly interesting relationship. So I would give this a read. It's not the most fast-paced or intensely plot-driven book ever, but it is enjoyable. I did find it very interesting. I did think there was a lot of food for thought in this. So yeah, I'd give it a go, and I'd read the book before watching the movie. The movie is quite different in certain aspects, so I definitely read the book first. Next book that I got to, I've been meaning to read for absolute ages because, first of all, let me tell you what it is. It's Sargasso Sea by Rhys, and I've been meaning to read this for ages because I read Jane Eyre at school a really long time ago. Actually, I think I probably read Jane Eyre before I had to read it for school, just out of interest, and I did enjoy Jane Eyre at the time. Since reading this, I've rethought my feelings on Jane Eyre. But Sargasso Sea is, and this is a bit of a spoiler, but it's based on the woman in the attic in Jane Eyre. That's not really a spoiler. In Jane Eyre there's a woman in the attic. This is based on that woman. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. If you've read Jane Eyre, I think you'd really enjoy this. I think it is very true to how I felt about the characters, particularly how I felt about Rochester. And I think it brings out the character of Bertha so well, and it makes her so interesting and compelling as a person. My issue with Jane is that she never seemed to make a mistake. Jane Eyre seemed to be about this woman who was just always perfect and always had perfect morals and never messed up and always said the right thing and did the right thing and upheld her principles. And I don't find that as compelling as reading about someone who is flawed and makes mistakes and is damaged, because that's all of us, and I feel like I can relate more to that. I find that a more interesting read, and that's this book. It looks at the character of Bertha and how she is damaged and her past and the horrible things that happened to her that made her who she was. And also, I've never liked Rochester as a romantic character. I've always thought he was an arse, and I never understood why people love him, and I thought that Rhys' portrayal of him as being, yes, as having some redeeming factors in that he was forced into a marriage and was essentially controlled by family, and those aspects I thought were good, but also they show him as being quite mean-spirited, and that's how I always felt about him. So I don't read a lot of classics. I think a lot of them just watch the BBC adaptation, but Sargasso Sea I would hugely recommend. I give it 5 stars. I think it is a great book, and normally I don't like something that it does, and that it doesn't give you all of the story. It leaves snippets out for you to sort of figure it out, but I actually think it really works in this. And I have a lot of respect for Rhys for writing this, because it's what I think it was what I wanted to read about Bertha. It's what I felt about Bertha, and encapsulated it, I think, quite perfectly. So, big recommendation for White Sargasso Sea, whether or not you've read Jane Eyre, but I think you'll get more out of it if you have read Jane Eyre. Next we have Tell the Wolves I'm Home by Rifka Brunt, which I really enjoyed. I thought this was an excellent book, and I think it's a very important book because it deals with an issue that I feel that I haven't been taught enough about, and now I'm trying actively to learn more about, and that is the AIDS crisis in the US in the 80s, I believe. And this book is a fictional account that centers around that time period. It doesn't necessarily go into the history of it or what exactly happened, but it deals with people living in the period who were affected by it. So June, the main character's name is June, and she is very, very close to her uncle, who is a gay man who dies of AIDS at the beginning of the book. And she knew he had AIDS, she knew he was gay, but she didn't really understand what AIDS meant, and she had a lot of misconceptions about it, as a lot of people did at that time. She also, knowing that he was gay, she didn't know he had a partner because her mother wanted to hide that from her. She didn't want her involved with the partner, she didn't want her to know him, and she blamed the partner for giving June's uncle AIDS. So it's a really interesting look at people's misconceptions around AIDS and around homosexuality at the time, even within a reasonably close family. But it's also a really beautiful look at family relationships when you share different opinions. It also has a really convincing and, I thought, poignant sisterly relationship between June and her older sister, and the misunderstandings that happen in family, and how sometimes we struggle to relate to each other and struggle to understand what other people are going through, and how that can make us act out sometimes. I thought this was a really beautiful book. It was everything I wanted, and the characters made me really angry quite often in the way that they behaved, but I think that was actually a good thing, because it meant that the writer was portraying them convincingly and showing how people can actually act. And I thought that the book had a really beautiful resolution at the end, and I think it's something really important, something that more people should be writing about, because I'm particularly fascinated by that time period and by how nuts people could be. And I wanted to know more about it. I still want to know more about it. I'm trying to learn more about it. And I think it's really great there's a work of fiction that deals with it, and I think deals with it so beautifully and manages to encapsulate so many relationships in such a convincing and beautiful way. 10 out of 10. Then, this month, I read my first ever Zadie Smith. I actually read 2 Zadie Smiths this month. I read White Teeth, which is her first book, and I read Swing Time, which is her most recent book. It was really interesting reading both of these books so close together. I didn't read them quite back to back. The next book that I'm going to talk about, I read in between them, but I read them very close together in the same month, almost back to back. And it was really interesting because I think it helped me see the general themes of her writing more clearly. That being said, they are still quite different books, and I would recommend them both, but I think I would probably recommend White Teeth more highly, because I think I respect this as a work of fiction more. I think it is particularly well crafted. But if you like White Teeth, I would definitely read Swing Time. They touch on similar themes, and I think that they do it quite well. So first, let's talk about White Teeth. White Teeth is Zadie Smith's first book, and it follows a generation of families. It starts with the patriarchs of those families and talks about them and their marriages and their experiences, and then the subsequent sections deal with the children from each of those families. So there's a daughter in one family and then twin boys in another family. But throughout the book, they're all continuously interlinked. And what this really was for me was a snapshot of modern Britain. It was a look at multiculturalism and immigration in Britain and feeling like an outsider and those sort of general themes, and a look at how people from other countries continue to, how do I put this? Continue on in their religion, continue on in their beliefs, continue with their traditions in a society that maybe isn't friendly to it, how they raise their children. It deals a lot with how you raise your children in a multiracial relationship or in a foreign country or country that's not the country of your birth. How do you raise your children? How do you instill in them your moral values, or is it a good thing that maybe they adopt the moral values of the country? It was really interesting. I don't think it offered any solutions or resolutions to the issues, but it portrayed a really interesting picture and raised a lot of issues that I wasn't necessarily thinking about. Now, what I will say is that I didn't particularly connect to any of the characters. I didn't feel particularly emotionally involved in this book. I felt quite removed from it. I felt like I was looking in at this world that I personally am not a part of as a white middle-class South African, but I felt like I was looking at this world but not necessarily getting emotionally involved in it, and I think that that was maybe a choice by Zadie Smith to write it that way. There was only one point where I felt particularly emotionally involved for one of the characters. One of the characters is a mixed race teenager, and she looks more like her mother, and there's a section in the book that says her body was designed for a different climate and a different country, and she goes to a hair salon to get her hair chemically straightened because she thinks it will make the boy she likes like her more if she looks more like the white girls. And that made me feel so emotional, because it's crazy and made me think about the standards of beauty that we instill on people and how nuts that is, and that got me quite emotional. But that was really the only time I felt particularly emotionally involved in the book. Otherwise, I felt like it was very Dickensian in how it portrayed Britain. It was like this sweeping look at what Zadie Smith sees modern British life to be like. I really respect this book. I did very much enjoy it. There's a lot of really great humour in it. I think it's actually an excellent accomplishment of a book, but there was that sense of being removed. So I don't know if I wouldn't say it's my favourite book ever, but I have a lot of respect for it, and I really think that it raised a lot of interesting issues, and as a very fascinating book, I think you should definitely read it. Then on to Swing Time, which is Zadie Smith's most recent novel, and can I say, I really think the cover is really cool, with the yellow on the front and the black on the back. Cool cover. Anyway, this book is about two girls growing up on I think it's a council estate in Britain. So similar ideas, two girls growing up in a council estate, both of them come from mixed families where one parent is white, one parent is black, and they are both interested in dancing, but only one girl is particularly talented and goes on to pursue dancing. The other girl goes on to pursue a very different career and ends up working as a PA to a famous singer, and that leads to her spending time in Africa, doing that thing where singers want to build schools or put funds into building schools, and so the PA ends up spending time there working on the development of the school. And it's about how the two girls' paths diverge and interlink and go out and come in throughout their lives. It's not told chronologically. So it starts when they're kids, and that's the longest section, but then as they hit sort of puberty, it sort of jumps to the future and then jumps back and jumps forward and jumps back. And this book, there's a lot of issues in this book that I think are really important being talked about. The idea of wealth and how spoilt some people are, and what's the word? I can't think of the words, but how they take advantage of that. What it means to grow up in a mixed family, what it means to grow up when you're not particularly fortunate money-wise. It touches on a lot of really interesting themes that I thought were important and that I was interested in, and particularly in the sections where the main character, who remains nameless, is in Africa. I thought it felt really important, because she's looking at black people in Africa and relating it back to her position and how they live and how she lives, and looking at class structure and the distribution of wealth and how unfair that is, and looking at the position of women, and really interesting themes, really important themes. And I also really like the pop star adopts a black baby, and it's made to look like a business transaction, like she bought the baby. And again, really interesting themes, really important themes, but similarly to White Teeth, I never felt particularly emotionally connected. I did enjoy it. I don't think it's as sweeping as White Teeth or Takes You, or impressed me as much as White Teeth, but I felt that it was a very, very good read, and there were a lot of moments where I had to stop and go, actually I really want to think about that, I think that's interesting. But I remained distant from the narrator, I remained distant from the main characters, I never felt I fully understood them. I felt they were more a vehicle to bring forth the issues rather than making me like them or making me emotionally involved with them in some way. So would I recommend it? Yes, I would. I think Zadie Smith is really great, and particularly if you want to start participating in the conversation about race and gender and all those things that we should be talking more about, then I think her books are really, really great to read. Multiculturalism, I think that these books are really great, but maybe not the thing to read if you're looking to get really emotionally invested. That's what I think. And finally this month I read When Breath Becomes Air by another name that I'm going to butcher, and that is Paul Kalanithi. I think that's how you say it. But this book, I've heard so much about it over the last, I don't know when it came out, but ever since it came out I've heard so much about it, and so many people have said that it's amazing and they loved it. And so I was very keen to read it, but I wasn't sure if I was going to love it as much as everyone else has, and I really did. I thought this was a really stunning, really special book. I've been telling everyone to read it. Since I finished it, I'm just thrusting it into everyone's hands and going, you have to read this book. It is so life-affirming and special and will really make you think about what is actually important to you, and are you living the life you want to live, and what are your true values, and make you think about death in a really interesting way, not in a depressing way, in a really interesting way. Although I wouldn't say this is necessarily a happy book in that it is about Paul. It is written by him, and he was a surgical resident. He wanted to be a neurosurgeon, and he was almost there, and then he discovered he had cancer. And it's about how that affected his life, how that affected his choice to have children, how that affected his marriage, his relationships, how that affected his training. He continued as a surgeon for a little while, but he eventually had to stop, and how that affected who he was and who he felt he was. And it's such a special book. I thought it did something that I love in non-fiction books, where it combines somebody musing on something really interesting. So Paul talks a lot about death and his thoughts on death and how he related to death as a neurosurgeon who saw death every day, and then how he related to death as somebody with cancer for whom death was imminent. And that I found fascinating. I also found fascinating that he talks about the intersectionality between English literature and brain surgery for him, and I thought that was incredibly interesting, because I would never have put those two together, but he studied English literature at university and then went on to become a brain surgeon, and that for me was so interesting. So combine these interesting topics and this interesting conversation with a really beautiful look at life and what is important, and how you decide what's important, how you choose to live your life, and how you set your values. This book is very, very special. I think everyone should read it, and I know I've said that a lot in this video, that there are books that I think a lot of people should read, but if you're going to read one thing that I've recommended in any of my videos actually, I really think you should read this. I think it is special and poignant and very beautiful, and a topic that touches all of us, and that we all have to decide what our values are, and death comes for all of us, and we all have to make the most of the life we have while we have it. Hence this book. Go buy it, go read it. If you read nothing else that I've recommended, then this is the thing. So that is it. That is everything I read in the month of January. We are now a couple of weeks into February, and I've been reading lots, so I will do a video obviously on what I've been reading in February, and I'll be back again with another video. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope there's some book recommendations for you. Hopefully the reviews were helpful. Hopefully there's something you want to pick up. If you agree with my review, if you don't agree, or if there's something you want to read, I'd love to hear about it. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, all of the things, and obviously there's comments. So yeah, it's been really nice having a chat, and I hope you have a good day. Bye!